govornika, Ana Milićević, principal and co-founder Sparrow Advisors. Tema je Greetings from the US, the top trends influencing advertising globally in 2021. Ana Milićević je preduzetnica, media executive, kao direktorka i suosnivačica Sparrow Advisorsa. Ona i njen tim strateških konsultanata rade sa kompanijama iz AdTeka, Marteka i trgovine i medija na strategijama, proizvodima, pozicioniranju na tržištu, lansiranju na nova tržišta i inovacijama. Ana, how do you do? Dobar dan. Can you hear us loud and clear, Ana?
Hello. Zdravo svima. I don't think I've heard my company described in Serbian to date, so thank you for that. That was very refreshing.
We're going to do it in English as well. First of all, happy birthday.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
And happy Thanksgiving. And happy Thanksgiving.
It's all sorts of celebrations over here today.
Yeah. All right. So what I said is you're basically an entrepreneur, media executive, and as a director and co-founder of Sparrow Advisors, you and your strategic consultants, you work with companies from AdTech, Martech, E-Trade, and media, covering strategy, all sorts of products, market position, market launch, and whatnot. Okay, so is this okay?
Oh, it's perfect, and especially I think the whatnot category is what we're going to be diving into today a little bit.
Okay, Anna, I'm glad to have you here today. So, fire at will. The floor is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you. All right, everybody, cross your fingers because this is usually where these things break. I may have just jinxed myself. Okay. So you all should be seeing my screen, hopefully. And hopefully it's in the right mode.
Yeah, it's just not the full screen mode for us.
Huh. All righty. Yeah. I know we practiced this and it worked really fine.
That's it now.
All right. Okay, now we're all set. So, hey, greetings from the US. I'm very excited to join you all today. I was very happy to get this invite, especially when it was supposed to be in April in Belgrade, which we all know is one of the most beautiful months to spend in Belgrade on any given year, except apparently this year. So this is me. You have two me's now. I have spent about 20 years in various leadership roles in technology, mostly in the West, a little bit in the East. I was the head of product for the product that Adobe bought to enter their MarTech waters. I spent a couple of years at analytics giant SaaS, working on marketing analytics and media and entertainment. And prior to starting Sparrow, I was an SVP at Signal, which is an identity vendor that just recently got acquired. So over the course of the last 5 years, I have been working with large companies across the globe, really, and some smaller companies too, on issues like scaling, entering new markets, and similar. But through my work at Sparrow, I've really had a very holistic view of the advertising marketing universes and some unique challenges, both in the North American market, but also in markets across the world. We are a boutique consultancy. We are based in the US, and usually when it's not 2020, at least I am on planes very frequently. You've probably seen me in the Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, trade magazines like Ad Age, Adweek, Digiday, where I'm often tapped on the shoulder as a recognized expert in ad tech. I also speak at conferences like this one, or like the Ad Exchanger Programmatic I/O that you can see on your screen. I believe that was in San Francisco. I've also spoken at Cannes Lion, a variety of Adweek conferences across the US, Asia, and Asia Pacific, and Europe. So enough about me. What I really wanted to talk to you today are patterns that this work that I've been doing over the past decade plus has allowed me to see. And that's that this is not something that may necessarily be obvious unless you spend a lot of time in between markets the way I do. But what I've noticed is that a lot of the conversations in AdTech and MarTech globally revolve around issues that are really, really important for the US market And what works for the US market doesn't necessarily work for other markets. Yet, you're reflecting these very US-centric issues in your day-to-day work just because our market is so large and influential. And usually when we bring this up to clients and when we come to the collective realization that this is one of the issues that's at play here, this is more or less their reaction. And that's more or less my reaction too whenever something like this comes up. So today I want to kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about 3 specific issues that you're likely to encounter in 2021 because they are huge topics in the US market and they are not that relevant outside of the US. And then I want to take a slightly longer view into what might be coming down the road from between 2021 and 2025. So let's go. So we all know that the US market is big, but we don't often dig into exactly how big it is. So in the US, a small business is usually defined by something as something that has less than $50 million in annual revenue and less than 100 employees. And by the standards of most other markets, this would not really be a small business at all. It gets worse when you look at medium-sized businesses, which are usually businesses that are defined to have just under $1 billion in annual revenue with a B and just under 1,000 employees. Again, in most other markets, these would be ginormous businesses and would definitely not be classified as something being on the small to mid-size. So there's a very, very big issue of scale when thinking about the US market and its influence right off the bat. More bigness stats. The US market is the world's largest consumer market. We have about 325 million people, but we also represent about a quarter of the entire world's household consumption. So we spend a lot on things that we buy. We also have a 20 trillion GDP, and let me tell you, a trillion is really a ludicrous number, but it is what it is. So we are very big, we have a lot of money, and we spend a lot of money on weird things. When it comes to the consumer market is obviously ginormous. So how big is the advertising market? Well, here we are also dwarfing our other country brethren. So the US market is by far the largest ad spend market in the world, topping at 225 billion in 2019. As you can see, the number 2 market, China, is less than half our size. In fact, you'll have to roll 6.5 of the subsequent countries together to get to parity with the US market. And this is really an economies of size difference that is playing out throughout the ecosystem. And then it was mentioning some research that IAB US has done. So like IAB Serbia, every year they do a bunch of revenue related research. And the annual digital advertising revenue report is sort of like a Bible in terms of understanding where the industry is and where the industry is going. So from that very same report, this is for calendar year 2019, which is the most recent calendar year that this analysis was performed on. We topped the market at 124.6 billion, again with a B, US dollars for digital advertising. And as you can see, it's a fairly healthy 15.9% year-over-year growth, especially looking at some of the earlier CAGRs. This tends to be pretty solidly in that 15-ish% range because our market is getting to be a little bit more mature, so we're not growing as fast as previously. So just to convert that to euro, that's about 105.2 billion with a B euro. Just to give you a comparison in size, from that very same research from IAB Serbia, we can see you have a much more aggressive rate of growth 2018 to 2019 than we do. But the overall market spend in Serbia on digital advertising was just under 50 million with an M euro. So again, orders of magnitude difference. And I'm not highlighting this to kind of go, oh, you have a small market, but because it's really hard to wrap your head around just how much larger the US market is, it's hard for me, even though I've been in it for 20 odd years. we also have a bunch of really big spenders in the US market. So there are 47 companies in the big spenders category that have all spent more than $1 billion on ads in 2019. Some of the highlights and some of the companies that I find particularly interesting. So Amazon has been the #1 spender in 2019. They're in #1. The Walt Disney Company is in #5, Ford, the automaker, #17, Samsung, #21, and then folks like McDonald's, who really spend an exorbitant amount on money on advertising every year, Nike clocking in at 35, Unilever, the CPG giant, at 38, and then rounding out the end, Netflix. So they are at just over $1 billion, 1.063 billion. And then the cutoff point is actually the US government, which spends just a smidge over $1 billion on advertising itself to its citizens. It's a really mind-boggling amount of money, I would say, every year. So when you have spenders like that, I can't emphasize how difficult it actually is to spend that kind of money. It is quite a challenge because you're still trying to reach a very defined audience, and you still have a fixed number of channels to try to reach them on. And you might be saying, well, Anna, that is like the world's silliest problem to have, right? Like having so much money and trying to figure out ways how to spend it, that really doesn't sound like a problem at all. But it is a problem because you're faced with actual daily operational challenges on how to distribute it, how to spend it, how to allocate it. And so what that manifests itself like in day-to-day work is that you need a tech stack with different tools. We call this the kind of the top end of the enterprise market. And I know that SAP's CTO is going to be joining us shortly later today in the program. So they would be a good example of like a top-end enterprise set of tools. Then you need to have an appetite for different advertising channels and formats. You need to build in some experimentation into your media mix model and your ability to execute. And then you'll always have some really unique product asks from your media partners, from your technology partners that are really just tied to the complexity of deploying those amounts of money consistently. So with that intro and that description of a gargantuan market, what is really going to be top of mind for US advertisers in 2021 that doesn't translate so well elsewhere? So there are three main topics that I'm going to dive into today. Number one is this push and pull between walled gardens and the open internet. So we've seen our market expand and grow, but underneath that expansion and growth, especially over the last couple of years, has really been a hyper concentration of revenue and really ad spend going to just a handful of companies. So this is your Facebooks, your Googles, your Amazons, the folks that want you to operate within the confines of their own universe, versus the open internet, which would be the universe of open publishers and the kind of ecosystem that programmatic advertising really enabled to take off on steroids. So from that same IAB PwC Internet Ad Revenue Report, this is one of my favorite pieces of annual research and certainly one of the most valuable assets that the IAB releases. You can start to see how concentrated this really is in terms of revenue. And so the top 10, or really the top 25 companies, command such an outsized portion of that overall very healthy market that if you're not Facebook, Google, Amazon, and a handful of others, you're really only accessing a portion of the pie that's about 20 billion in size, about 16% of the market. And again, you might say, well, but that's really still a pretty sizable portion of the market. Well, yes, it is, but there's a lot of competition in it, and the spend trends are going more towards the walled gardens. So the concentration amongst the top 25 is getting sharper. But even within the top 25, it's getting concentrated in the top 3. So that's Google, Facebook, and Amazon as of late, rolling out their advertising programs. So you can see that between Google and Facebook, it's about half of all ad spend. And when you add Amazon, we go up to about 68% of the whole market. So the market's very concentrated at the top, and that gives Google, Facebook, Amazon, and a few of the others a lot of really a lot of market power and bargaining power. So that in turn means that you as a marketer need to turn into a little bit of a detective and like put your Sherlock Holmes hat on to really make sure that you have all the right pieces needed to execute. So if you're commanding, you don't have to command a billion-dollar budget, but as a CMO or a head of marketing, you definitely need to have a command of a variety of different tools and technologies that you're using day to day, especially how you're going to be able to track your efficacy and what's actually working. I have an interesting example from JP Morgan Chase, who was the number 11th big spender in 2019 on the how much money they've spent on advertising category, who also used to advertise on 400,000 different websites through programmatic advertising. And a couple of years ago, they looked at that and they said, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this? This seems like it's really, really complex. And sometimes to serve just a couple of impressions on a really, really obscure blog. And they cut that down to just 5,000 websites. And they noticed no change in performance. In fact, their performance improved. So there's something to be said about that impulse to want to reach everybody everywhere and every opportunity you have, and then pulling that back and really focusing on the customers that you really care most about. So this complexity that was born in the US is now bleeding over to other systems, and it's reflected in that I want to be able to target however I want on whatever system, wherever I can. And that might not be the best way forward for a lot of other markets, including the US market, actually. The number 2 topic that's in every single conversation, you can't escape it, is connected and convergent television. Now, this is a really interesting one because I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations around CTV as well. And this is solely because of how the US television versus internet markets have evolved. So here's a view of the different categories that people spend money on in advertising. You see internet is leading the pack with our 125 billion. And then number 2 here is TV advertising, right around 70 billion. So putting on our history hats on, since the inception of digital advertising in the US in the mid-90s, we've been chasing TV because TV was always the de facto standard for advertising. You know how big our Super Bowl ads get, and there's this excitement even amongst the non-advertising professionals about TV advertising in general. And so we'd been chasing TV advertising for years and years and years. And in 2016, we finally flipped. We flipped from TV being the highest spent category to internet being the highest spent category, and have just been hitting the gas ever since, while television advertising has remained pretty stagnant at the time, very slow increase. What's behind that is that paid TV, like cable television in the US, is becoming less and less of a good deal for consumers, which you can see here with these rather depressing graphs on how quickly US households are giving up their cable subscriptions, which in turn poses a challenge for television advertisers because now there's fewer viewers that you can target. So brands that have previously been spending very aggressively on TV want alternatives, and the alternatives that they're coming up with are largely related to connected television and the viewership that's migrating to digitally originating TV. So these are your streaming services, SVOD, AVOD, and similar. But the high CPMs that used to exist in television land have been slow to translate over into digital land. So this whole conversation is very, very US centric because in most of Europe and Asia, linear television or cable subscriptions and similar, they really aren't a bad deal. They're usually something that is maybe not terribly expensive or something that you wouldn't consider giving up. And so in non-US markets, the CTV conversation is more about consumer flexibility and better viewing experience, being able to watch from many different devices as opposed to just in your television. And it's less about this fundamental reimagining of the commercials that underline television monetization, which is the number one topic in the US. So it's a bit of a, always when you hear CTV discussed in market, have that little thing in mind, that the motivations for CTV, the conversations in the US are really all solely tied to monetization. And then third but not the least challenge here is going to be around privacy and regulation. So we have a very liberal data market. We've had one for, since the inception of direct marketing, really. And there's no federal level data protection legislation or standard at all. So the US doesn't have a GDPR-like anything really at the federal level. We do have now, as an emerging category, some state level activity. If you've heard of CCPA, that's California's attempt to establish a GDP-like structure, but that would only be valid for the state of California. And I think we're up to now 8 other states also wanting to submit their own standards for data protection and privacy, mostly around digital data sets. No one really considers the offline data sets until it's way too late. And that's a little bit like building a house without a foundation, because part of what makes the American market so interesting, lucrative, and strong is that it is a big market. And so what these state level legislations risk doing is basically discombobulating that market and making it really difficult for companies to adhere to privacy regulations that are quite local. So this is a unique scenario that we're in, and that we're now going to kind of suffer through together. If you've been reading the tech press, so your TechCrunches, your Recodes, and similar, you've probably picked up on a pattern that kind of goes along the lines of, well, big tech is too big, so it must be regulated. And if you think back to those slides that we walked through just a few minutes ago, the concentration of revenue amongst just a few companies is really what this argument is about. So we don't have data protection legislation. So the only argument that we can make is, oh, Google is too influential or Facebook is too influential. But we don't really have a strong legal basis to house that on, other than antitrust regulation that's been in play for previous monopoly conversations, mostly around telecoms and really a previous era of media communication. So we're seeing a lot of noise and a lot of challenges around, hey, we really need to address this and change this, and this needs to look different. But it kind of looks like this in practice, where, yeah, we really want things to be different, but we don't quite know what that difference should look like on the other end. So we very much run the risk of looking like the adorable pink blob in the rightmost box here for a while longer. So that's not something that's going to be just a 2021 issue, but because there is now been an antitrust action against Google filed, and we see signs of similar activities impending, that is definitely going to be one of the topics that kind of bleeds over in privacy-related discussions, in data protection discussions, and similar conversations that you're likely to have with your vendors or with your brand partners and similar. Okay, phew. So we're gonna survive coronavirus in 2020. 2021 has some interesting topics there ahead, but what should we look for in a slightly longer time frame? So what does the next 3 to 5 years look like beyond 2021? So I like this comparison quite a bit because US market influence really is a little bit like an iceberg when you think about it. 90% of that influence is underwater and invisible. So you have to be very mindful of picking up on things that are very much US specific, that are just filtering through and bleeding through. So 2021 we've covered. What's underneath the surface and what can we expect in the next 5 years? So I've spent a fair amount of time today talking about concentration of revenue and the increased market power of just a few companies. There's another large undercurrent here, and that's that we are trying to ascertain how to reimagine the underlying monetization of media. So whether that's going to be through advertising alone, whether that's going to be through a mix of advertising and subscriptions, whether there's going to be a commerce angle. There are a lot of different considerations here, but this is all tied back to some technical triggers, like the fact that consumers are moving their primary method of consumption to mobile devices overwhelmingly, like the upcoming disappearance or disintegration of third-party cookies, which are really the mechanism for a lot of how we monetize the internet today. So there are clear triggers that we need to react to, but like the little pink blob in the cartoon, we're not quite sure what this is going to look like on the other end. So this is a time for a lot of experimentation and a lot of revisiting of the first principles and assumptions. So things like, how much should a movie rental cost? How much should you pay to access a high quality newspaper? How much should you pay to access somebody's paid newsletter and similar? We're also anticipating a period of during which a lot of new advertising formats will emerge, and we've already seen quite a bit of this in formats like esports, formats like live shopping, and usually at the nexus of video and video, social, interactive, and commerce coming together on mobile. I think you guys are one screen behind where I was. Yes. So new advertising formats are starting to emerge, which is always an exciting time and always an exciting opportunity for new companies to step in, and especially companies from smaller markets to come in and specialize on like providing a suite of tools for, let's say, YouTube streamers or similar. This is where it gets really exciting, I think, outside of what's possible just in the US market. And then the flip side of that is that all of these technology shifts that I was mentioning earlier are kind of happening at the same time. And it's kind of one thing to weather a technology shift of desktop to mobile in a short amount of time, but it's an entirely different one to now have 3 or 4 of these very, very critical technology shifts converging. And in many ways, it's kind of like the pandemic. You have a stressor that's causing you, a lot of systems that you thought are just going to work to buckle and to maybe not function as well as possible. So on the brand side, on the agency side, but also on the tech company side, this is causing a lot of revisiting of, hey, is this what we should be taking to market? Is the the vendor and the partner that we've been using for the last 10 or so years, are they still the right partner for us today? And what should we be looking for in partners in the future? So it's a just seeing the results of the poll. So this is a really beautiful spread between agency, publisher, advertiser, and that other category here that we have in attendance. I imagine that this tech uncertainty is affecting everyone pretty equally, probably most acutely felt today on the agency and advertiser side, but very rapidly across the entire market. So that's 3 things you need to remember for 2021, and now 3 things that you should remember for 2021 to 2026, or whatever the next 5-year cycle is going to be in advertising. So with that, I would like to wrap up and tackle some questions from the audience. This is how you can get in touch with me. We also publish a weekly strategy newsletter called Sparrow One. It's available on our website. It's website/newsletter. And I invite you all to sign up for it. We tackle a complex strategic topic every week and go deep, and it's a really fun read.
Thank you, Anna, very much. We have some questions. First of all, where do you see opportunities for companies, especially AdTech and MarTech, from markets like ours to plug into a larger market like the US or the EU? Where can we be competitive?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think you have so many opportunities here. Usually when we work with companies from not just Eastern Europe, but Europe in general, they are positioning themselves in their native market as enterprise companies. And if you remember that definition of how small businesses versus medium-sized businesses in the US look like, most enterprise companies in Europe are actually in the small to medium-sized business segment in the US. So where there's a gap right now is in marketing technology that is for smaller companies. So think of, a clothing brand, for example, that is very good at developing and designing clothing and maybe their commerce operations, but would like an easy button for advertising. Maybe they don't have enough budget for a dedicated agency, or they don't know who to work with, but they just want to automate their advertising on, Instagram and Facebook and maybe Google to a lesser extent in this particular scenario. So that would be where I would focus my attention on, that kind of automation and making marketing easy for smaller businesses. And that's a really, really, really huge market and huge market need in the US. And the beauty of it is that something like that can be competitive almost anywhere in the world, because that segment is going to be present in just about any economy.
Okay, and we have another question. Is digital advertising now the default, or should we say main form of advertising in the US?
I would definitely say yes. Yes, it is, as of about 2016. So that's when we flipped the spend levels from more money going to television advertising, traditionally, that being the spendiest category, to now digital. And now everybody is thinking digital first. But that doesn't necessarily mean, just banners and, search ads here or there, or things like that. It's really reimagining what the entire advertising experience looks like with digital and data underlying it. But yeah, it's definitely become, when you say advertising, now you think digital advertising in the US market.
Okay, great. And the final question, American election, it's being, worldwide, it's very important because it affects the whole globe. So the US now has a new president and incoming administration, of course. So will a change in leadership have any effect on regulatory activity? What do you think?
That is an excellent question. So yes and no. I think most immediately we've still got the Google antitrust suit. So all of this regulatory conversations are usually like a 3 to 5 year type conversation. So anything that was started in 2020 is really going to come to light in 2022 or thereabouts. The signals that we've seen from the newer administration is that they would be focused more on not really the traditional anti-monopolist stance, but we expect them to take the mantle of data protection and maybe scale the state level initiatives to come up with a GDPR-like solution across the entire country. So I think we're definitely going to see a much more stable, less haphazard 4 years. The last 4 years haven't really had a lot of clear direction. I don't know if you've followed the TikTok debacle, but basically the US government had decided that they wanted TikTok to sell to a US company and initiated this really bizarre, highly unprecedented, very potentially illegal process that is still going on and is hopefully going to come to a close as the new administration takes over. So yeah, less haphazard, more direction, and I think more around data protection and privacy is what I would like to see.
Okay, thank you, Anna, very much. Once again, happy birthday, happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much for your time. Everybody, now is the time for a virtual applause.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gents, Ana Milićević, Sparrow Advisors. Nenade, na kratko smo te videli samo da nam se javiš. Ja verujem da možemo dalje da idemo.
Samo sam teo Ani da mahnem.
Lepo, dobro. Ja se nadam da ovaj moj poziv za virtualni aplauz nailazi na odobravanje ili virtual hug, šta god. Idemo dalje. Sada je na redu Volker Hein, Chief Technology Officer, odnosno čovjek koji dolazi iz SAP-a, odnosno SAP-a.